in the same direction. So let me just go back through a few of the comments that were made regarding the infill lot designation. And there was a recommendation to add 2 more lots to the lots that are classified as infill. A couple of thoughts that I have is, first, back in 2005, we actually did quite a bit of hearing, quite a bit of discussion about what lots would be infill and what lots would not be infill. We agreed to quite a few infill lots that technically don't meet the infill requirement, or don't meet the need for an infill requirement, but we've offered to do that. And then also, I don't know if you even have the access, but in phase 3, we have actually committed to quite a few lots that will be single story. They go well beyond the infill requirement. So, for example, that when she pointed to that row of lots saying none of those, if you recall, she said none of those would apply to infill. So, lots 88 through 93, we've actually committed to making all of those single story. Angie, can you point that out?
It would be these.
That whole row right there. None of those actually technically meet the requirement for infill, but we've offered to make those infill in our. We had numerous neighborhood meetings, a lot of negotiation with property owners. And so we agreed to that, which I think is no problem. In our phase 1, we had an infill requirement for maybe 4 or 5 lots. Yet we find that actually 50% of the lots are single story. So I think when it's all said and done, we're going to get a lot more single story homes than just the infill designation. My point with all that is, on lot 52 and 54, I'm concerned about making those infill designation. 52 and 54 were suggested to be added to the list of lots that were designated as infill. Lot number 52 has 2 two-story buildings adjacent to it. And lot number 54, although it's adjacent to a single-story home, it would be, the 2 lots abutting it would primarily be on this development. So even though we may well see a single-story home in there or a home that meets infill, I'd like to not impose that requirement on a potential developer. Those lots also have the requirement to have fire sprinkler systems. So each one of those things just adds one more burden to the builder on those properties.
Are those, I can't see the numbers, that main road has its hazards, so are those?
That lot right
okay,
there.
There you go, okay.
And that lot right there are the 2 that are proposed, I believe, Angie, is that right? The 2 that are proposed to be added to the number of infill lots.
With respect to 52, where's the 2-story houses?
Over here, there's 2 two-story homes. Excuse me, let me grab my file here. There's actually 3 two-story homes, so all 3 houses that would abut this, 1, 2, 3, are 2-story, all 3 of these.
But not going south as far as 54.
There's a single story there and a single story there.
Now with 54, then, these are all undeveloped here. These are part of the phase 2, correct?
Yes.
Do you have, does your planning lay out what story houses those are going to be? Or is that up to the buyers?
This is an infill home here. This was not. So this will be either a single story, or the way the rules are, you have your backyard setback of 15, you go in a foot per foot. If you want to go up another 8 feet, you have to go in another 8 feet. So 59 rather, will be an infill lot. This has, there's a single story home here and a single story home here. So that, again, we really don't have any issues with this. I prefer not to impose those restrictions on a potential builder, but it doesn't give us a lot of grief. We're anxious to make the neighborhood blend with the neighbors so that it's not a problem for us. Lighting, let me talk about lighting for just a minute. As I read code 16.43, I think that had to have been written for residential lighting or for private property lighting, because at the time it was written, County Utility Board was doing all of the public lighting. So ours is the first subdivision to do the street lights outside of Canby Utility. And let me just add that we're proposing to do all LED. This will be the first subdivision with LED lights, and that's simply a new standard the Canby Utility Board would like to go to. It's elective at this point. Each light's a little more expensive, but what they are, too, is they're all 100% shielded. They're all fully shielded. Every LED light is fully shielded. An LED light, as opposed to a high-pressure sodium or mercury vapor that we're used to seeing, an LED light is just a series of flashlights, and each one has a single beam of light, and they're actually directed to a point, so you can very well control where they go. So they're all classified as fully shielded. So if there's any concern on your part, we're fine with a condition, just say that all the lights are fully shielded. That's an easy thing for us to do. And actually, the lumen limits, I don't know the history behind the lumen limits, other than I heard Angie mention that they were likely just correlated directly to the wattage that was allowed before. Now, what's happening in the LED world is the lumens per watt is changing monthly. So where it used to be 60 lumens per watt, now we're up to 120 or 150 lumens per watt. So that the lights that we've selected were the ones that Canby Utility Board or Canby Utility recommended. And the smallest one they have, like Angie mentioned, the smallest one of the Cobra lights that go on 10th Street is twice the lumens that are allowed by the code. So, I mean, that's simply the smallest lumen fixture you can buy. That was a GE fixture.
Let me ask you this, on phase one, are you proposing to use the same lighting that was on phase one, or is this an entirely different lighting?
It'll look the same, the fixture will look the same, but this is all LED. So phase one was high pressure sodium.
How about the lighting, the amount of light coming out of the lumens coming out of it?
Actually, it'd be much better. So what we can do with LED lights now is we can minimize that bright spot, dark spot, bright spot, dark spot. Now we can get a much more uniform lighting level down the entire street. So it won't be as bright as when you're standing under a high pressure sodium, but it won't be near as dark when you're between fixtures either. So they're much better. We can actually design a lighting level, and that would dictate the spacing and the height. One thing that's in the Canby code, which makes me also think it doesn't apply to streetlights, is they have the requirement for lumens, but they don't have the requirement for actual lighting level. So typically on an ODOT project or a project, we would have a lighting requirement that would say you need to maintain maybe a 0.6 foot candles with a uniformity ratio of 3 or 4. And that would say you'd have to do your photometrics and you'd have to show that you have an average of 0.6 everywhere. But what we have in the codes now, it simply has a lumen amount. So we could put one light fixture every 400 feet, as long as it was under that lumens, and we would meet the code, but it would provide the kind of lighting that you want. So our firm does quite a bit of lighting, and I'm confident we can satisfy the requirements for the fully shielded and find a good, adequate lighting level for you and the Canby Utility Board would accept. We've been working with Canby Utility Board for 15 years, and so Gary Stockwell and our firm have been working on the new lighting standards. We've used them on Sequoia Parkway, for example. They have LED lights, so also the Acorn lights on 2nd and 1st. Now, I don't know about 1st Avenue. I know 2nd Avenue, we put the LED lights on, and they are shielded. The actual shields are inside the Acorn fixtures to where the light can't go up. So it's easy to shield an LED, and we're happy to have that condition. There's no concern on our part. Move on to parking. I heard that the fire department preferred no parking on Elm Street, and the only reason we have proposed no parking on Elm Street was we were told that there was no potential for parking on Elm Street. So I have a concern that that lot right there and that lot right there, must have Brian's pointer, and those two lots really have no place for guest parking. So a couple of solutions for that. You see, because they're on the interior block, this guy has parking here, this guy has parking here, this one has parking here, this one has no street frontage. And the goal, you could maybe interpret, see what we're after. We're just after the appearance along this park, that all of these houses would not be 50% of the house a garage door and 50% of their front lawn be concrete. So we're not allowing any driveways or any garage doors to face Elm Street. And I think it'll be a much more appealing presence all around this area, with if all we see is grass and a walkway out to a mailbox. The Parks Department has also requested they have some parking for maintenance. So a couple of solutions that I would propose, and we'll be working with the Parks Department for whatever standards they want in the park. Again, we're happy to do whatever they'd like. We did the park design on this phase because they required it. On phase 1, they wouldn't allow us to get involved in the park design, so we're pleased to be involved in this. Have no grief with anything they're asking for. A couple of options, though, is one, either we have some designated areas along this 20-foot width that allow some parking. Maybe we allow 2 or 3 parking spaces here, 2 or 3 parking spaces here, and 2 or 3 parking spaces there. That would give the maintenance people a place to park. They're concerned about having to drag branches across the roadway if they were to park on the outside. But if we were to allow them to park along the inside of the park here, that would give them access. Or alternatively, maybe put a little 8-foot parallel parking where it cuts into the park. So a little bump into the park area that allows maybe 2 or 3 parking spots in 2 or 3 locations. But ideally, I guess if the fire department would allow it, we'd sure like to see parking along Elm Street. The street right-of-way width, let me just comment that pretty much everything that we've proposed, in fact, these plans, you can see that we've submitted preliminary plans, were actually prepared quite a few years ago. The plat was prepared in 2005. We have not changed anything on the plat, so this is exactly the plat that was turned in 2005. The cul-de-sac width, diameter of the radius of the curb on the cul-de-sac was one concern that was raised, and I just wanted to clarify that the application in 2005 was actually very clear. It called out the actual footage on all of those, explained what they would be and how they would work. We proposed to provide required fire sprinklers on the homes that had limited access for the fire vehicles, and we've been working with Canby Fire Department to make sure those areas were acceptable to them. So we're hoping there's no discussion of a change of the radius because that has a substantial impact on the lot layouts and how to reconfigure the lots to maintain the areas. The sidewalks, the 4.5 foot plus a 6-inch curb, the entire first phase is built with that standard. The park would supposedly have that same standard, 4.5 feet plus a 6-inch curb. We're hoping we can maintain the same thing as an infill sidewalk to match just a 4.5 foot sidewalk with a 6-inch curb. That was the sidewalk standard for the city of Canby up until just a few years ago, where we just recently changed to 6-foot standard. Planter strips, I had a question that came to my mind about the planter strips. I believe the codes, Canby Municipal Code requires a private property owner to maintain his frontage. So I think if you do require...
I think you're right.
I think if anyone has a planter strip in front of their house, even though it's in the public right-of-way, the private property owner is required to maintain it. So there shouldn't be any hesitation on requiring it. I know our problems over the last 2 decades have been when people don't adequately maintain their planter strip, and so we've attempted to require standards that would be minimal maintenance. In this case, we're proposing along 10th Street to have a planter strip that we would plant trees in. We're looking to have we'll work with the Parks Department, but we're looking to have a consistent look along 10th we think would be nice. And similar to what we did along Territorial Road, where we planted paper bark maples the full length of our Territorial Road frontage. I think that'll look nice when the leaves are out and when the leaves are falling. But the bump outs, these bump outs right here, where they said that we should do those in stamped concrete, I think that's a little bit counterproductive also to try to provide a green strip all along 10th and then to have stamped concrete for the bump out. So I prefer not to do stamped concrete. But again, everything I'm saying tonight, we're not unhappy with conditions. Whatever conditions you impose will be acceptable to us. The maintenance, though, if that's a concern, the maintenance is on the private property owner. And I think that people generally would prefer to have a pretty planter area, even if it's bark dust in a tree versus stamped concrete. Access, there was a discussion about lots 70 and 71 having access off of Douglas. I think that makes sense. We would like, I think, to have the frontage of the house facing 10th because all of these lots will have driveways in front of the homes facing 10th. The concern I would raise is on 57 and 67, there's a condition, and I'm confused by the condition a little bit, but it's a condition that they will have driveways off of 10th, just so we don't confuse this area here. But I'd like them to not be required to face Elm, because I think that all the rest of the homes will face 10th, and I think facing Elm is kind of an unusual area. It's kind of a no man's land. We're going to have a little turnaround triangle here that's going to be stamped concrete. So the condition to have 67 and 57 face Elm Street, I would prefer that they face 10th.
Those were copied from phase 1, so.
Yeah, and so that would be a condition I would like to have, that 57, 67 could face 10th Street. I just think it'd be a better appearance for the development. The last thing I want to comment on is just the HOA. We originally had several pieces of property like this, and there was another one up in phase 1 that were going to be owned by the HOA, and the city wasn't in favor of allowing a water feature or some kind of thing like that, which we wanted to do there. We elected to eliminate that. We combined that area in with the park, so we're going to dedicate this with the park to the city, and then not have an HOA. Now, the only benefit of an HOA is to collect dues, monitor rules, and to take care of common areas. Well, in our project, we don't have any common areas. They're all privately owned. And as to enforcing CC&Rs, we have the same ability to enforce CC&Rs. The HOA, the only difference would be that an HOA may have a president, and they would be responsible to enforce these CC&Rs. But in our case, everyone that lives in the subdivision is responsible to enforce the CC&Rs. So that's the only comments I have. Unless you have any questions of me.
I do.
Go ahead.
On
Mr. Saban.
67 and 57, I'm looking at those bump outs there, and if you're wanting to have the access to 10th for those two lots, how would that affect the bump outs?
I don't think the bump outs are far enough that they would be more restrictive than what the setback requirement is for the intersections. So these are quite deep lots. I think that it's an easy condition to say, you know, there's a lot of discussion in your packet about the setbacks of the driveways to the intersection. So I don't have any grief at all that those would, if the setback would allow a driveway in that bump out, I wouldn't have any problem to condition the driveway to be well off the bump outs. I think the condition was going to change to be 50 foot from an intersection, which would be more than adequate to push those driveways away from those bump outs.
Do you have any position, you heard Mrs. Lenhart talk about the code, our spacing standards for the driveways versus, or I guess the design specification standards from the traffic engineer versus our code. Do you have any thoughts on that and how that would impact your development?
I'm not at this moment familiar with that. Was that the 30-foot versus the 50-foot?
Yeah.
One of them.
Yeah, and I don't really have any grief with any of that. Those are things that the building department would take up with a builder when they bring a set of plans. And our role in this is simply to subdivide land and provide an opportunity for a home builder to come in, or a custom home buyer to come in and bring their own builder and do whatever they'd want to do. So it's a rarity, I think. Most developments have an owner, and that owner builds most of the homes in that subdivision. So what were the other requirements?
Inconsistencies. Let's see.
I have a little bit of a concern with the 5-foot spacing to a property line. I have a little bit of a concern with the 30-foot spacing. I think was that between driveways, two driveways on the same lot, because we have some situations where I have a driveway right there, for example, that goes to this lot, and I'll have a driveway to this lot, and it's going to want to be right next to it. So I think that 30-foot spacing for two driveways on the same lot should not apply when it's an easement for an adjoining lot. The 5-foot spacing is okay. It gives me a little bit of concern for this lot again. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think we have 5 of these types of lots. But that driveway, if I need to be 5 foot offset from the property line, that just makes it that much more difficult to minimize the impact on this buildable area for that lot. These are a 15-foot access easement, which I would expect to be a paved 12-foot driveway that goes back into the second home on that route.
And with respect to those particular topics on the spacing of the driveways, you expressed general agreement or acquiescence with staff's conditions, so you don't see any problem with any of the conditions imposed by staff on those?
I don't believe I had
The
any
only
concern
one we
with that.
proposed was the minimum and maximum width at this point.
Okay.
No, yeah, no problems with that. It was min 12, max 24 for a 2-car, and it was at max 28 for a 3-car.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other proponents of this application? People that are in support of approval of the application? Would like to speak? Do we have anybody on any list, any sign-up lists? Go ahead, come up.
I'm a proponent.
Okay.
I'm Derek Colby. I've had the privilege of working out here with Crystal Park Construction.
Can you tell your address for us?
P.O. Box 34, I live in Tualatin.
Okay.
I'm a realtor. And been working out here for a little over a year and a half once Crystal Park Construction started building here. And met a lot of really nice buyers, prospects that wanted to live in Northwood Estates because of the quality of the
Sir,
development.
let me have you stop 1 minute. Can you tell your full P.O. box in case we need to mail you something
Sure.
as an interested
P.O.
party?
Box 3432, Tualatin, Oregon, 97062.
Thank you. Please continue.
But anyway, my background was as a builder for 15 years, and I became a realtor about 13 years ago. So I'm really kind of dialed into what a builder goes through when they're building properties in a development. And I think that the applicants have done a great job of creating a quality subdivision that is very desirable for people in the Canby area and other areas that want to live in a more smaller community to get out of the bigger city area. So there's been a real good mix of younger buyers and retired, more mature buyers that appreciate the quality in the neighborhood. And so I think the only comments I would make is on the infill lots. I would hate to see a requirement for single-level homes because we're having a hard time making plans meet the required square footages if we don't have that option for some second story. I think the current conditions that you have work pretty good as far as not creating a 2-story high wall against the property line adjacent to an infill property. And then we could run into problems if there's another downturn. If you make that requirement, there might be homes that could be built this year, and if there's a downturn, there may be a 5-year wait before other lots could be built on. So if I believe the infill has a 5-year, it's classified as an infill lot if the house has been there for 5 years, I believe. So, and I think I agree with the applicant about the consistency with the sidewalks. I think to try to mix 4.5 feet to 6 feet would kind of create some inconsistencies for the feel of the development. And the only other question I had was, I think Angie had a picture of the Track B park with maybe some kind of parking design or something. I was just, so is that part of the plan right now with the little parking?
The latest iteration, yes.
Yeah, and that's simply for park maintenance vehicle when they're maintaining that park. They need some place to get off the street. And so it wasn't necessarily meant for park visitors or neighbors necessarily. It was meant for a park maintenance vehicle to park off the street when they're maintaining the park, one on each side.
Would there be any, why would you want to prohibit neighbors, I guess, from parking there?
I'm not sure at this point how they have
residents?
it designed or set up, whether it would really accommodate other vehicles or not. Maybe if there's a signage on it that has certain hours posted for maintenance vehicles and the rest of the time it's open because it would defeat the purpose if visitors or people were parking overnight and the maintenance vehicle came, they couldn't use them.
How many spots?
I'm gonna cut this off. It's not a Q&A, so.
Okay.
You can
Yeah,
have the,
I was just
state your
curious about
position on
that.
things.
So anyway, I guess my position is, if that's part of the design, I could, if there's 6 or 7 parking spots there, potentially, maybe 1 or 2 could be restricted to the park staff, and the rest could be used for the residents, and that's about it. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Do any commissioners have any questions for this gentleman? Okay, thank you, sir.
You bet.
Okay, any other proponents? Come on up. Counselor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'm Clint Coleman, 2114 North Vine Street here in Canby, and I'm a city councilor and also a liaison to the traffic safety. And I just want to say how I think it's a first-class development, very impressed with it, and I just appreciate in the recommendation of the item 10, the applicant shall negotiate any possible transportation SDC credit exchange and determination of its suitability for a voluntary offer for installation of traffic calming measures on North Birch Street and West Territorial Road with the City Council. And I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for your willingness to work with us, because we all love Canby and we want to keep it a safe place. Thank you.
Okay, any other proponents? They seem to come up slowly when they... Okay, no other proponents. I'm going to close for proponents and open it up for opponents. Are there any opponents to the development? Yes, ma'am. Please come up to the microphone. And again, please state your name and your address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Susan Sessions, and I live at 646 Northwest 12th Avenue here in Canby. And so, yes, I have a very vested interest in our development here. First of all, I would like to state that I was the public that came in today discussing the CCNRs and the HOA connection. I'm not a proponent of an HOA. I will start with that. But my purpose in being here today is that I am concerned about accountability, and as Mr. McLeod, had discussed, they have been really great about talking with the community. My husband and I, we didn't move in until 2006 after all of this was started. We knew from the very beginning that we would be losing our dead-end street. And I can't say that I'm excited about that. However, we understand that that's going to happen. My concern, however, is that are all the things that are supposed to be watched out for and being done, who's accountable for watching out for that, as far as especially the CCNRs? Because my understanding is, and again, I'm not a legal person, I don't have planning background, but I do a lot, I'm concerned, and I do research, and I've been doing a lot of research on this. And my concern is who is going to watch out for it, and how do we keep from going from phase to phase, and not just kind of going a little bit off and a little bit off until we're, and who's accountable for watching out for these things. In the CCNRs that I have been a lot, and as Mr. McLeod said, there have been a lot of things when they were discussing with the community, those of us that live around the area, that they, there were a lot of negotiations, there were a lot of things that we had requested, okay, and I appreciate that. However, I will say for myself, when I went to a community meeting last year, and I brought this up and asked who is who is responsible. For example, in the CCNR, it says that all property owners shall at all times be subject to it, whatever it may be. If there is not an HOA, my understanding was from that meeting that the developers have said once they sell the plot, that's it. They have no longer any kind of control over what happens when the builder comes in or anything else, unless the city does whatever, but for example, in phase one, they were talking about here in 47 and 48, how the driveways will be behind the houses. That was supposed to also happen in Lot 8 on the first phase, and that didn't happen. There is no lot easement there. I took pictures today to make sure that that was, what my memory was correct, because we walk in that neighborhood. My concern is not the specifics of, are there trees, are there no trees, or anything like that. My concerns are they holding true to what, in good faith has been discussed? You have the ordinances, you have the laws, you have the state laws, city laws, whatever, and those are obviously most important. But as a community member, as a neighborhood member who is going to be affected by this, and yes, it's a nice development. I don't say that it's not, but I don't want to get through phase 2, 3, 4, and we're just that much off. Because it was intended that they build, that homeowners bring in their own builder, and that hasn't been able to happen because of economic downturns. There have been numerous builders who have come in, bought lots, and are now, fortunately, I think they've all been sold by now. But we all know what happens if that continues. It's going to continue on, and all these things, all these watch words or watch things, and all these, good faith agreements will go by the wayside. And so I'm just proposing that the CCNRs, be looked at, because they are a legal document, from my understanding. And if you want to, there are Oregon statutes. I understand, I think that you are a land lawyer, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so you may very well be familiar with that, but I'm, just as a reference, I was looking at the Oregon, Chapter 94 of the Oregon Revised Statutes to the Oregon Planned Community Act. Now, whether or not this is subdivision or planned community, again, that has to be looked at, in my opinion.
That was my question for you. Were you looking at the plan unit development statute?
I was looking at I was looking at Chapter 92. I was looking at 94, and it's really difficult to know, I came up with a definition of a subdivision. But the planned community is it's again up for interpretation somewhat, unless it's somebody who knows what the interpretation has been. For a layman, I'm sorry, I haven't been able to figure that out. All I'm asking for, though, is those questions be asked, because I would like to know that we're not going to head down a slippery slope as we continue on with these different phases. I appreciate being heard.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for the gentle lady? Okay. Any other opponents? Come on up, ma'am. Again, please don't forget to state your name and your address for the record.
My name is Barbara Carmel. My address is 219 Northwest Territorial. You probably can guess what I'm here about. When I went to the neighborhood meeting in the Northwest, where there was an hour-long discussion of the traffic impacts of this subdivision, and a full airing of concerns, and I think the engineers heard us loud and clear. However, the intersection of Elm and Territorial, which is at the north end of Elm Street, was generally felt by the experts would not have a heavy traffic impact from this subdivision. I don't concur with that, but I'm not a traffic expert, I'm just a guesser. So what I'd like to suggest is that just before Phase 1 opens up in this subdivision, you do some serious traffic count work on the north of Elm Street, north of North Elm, in other words, north of this subdivision. Serious traffic counts and speed counts about what happens to the existing residents on Elm Street between the north end of this subdivision and Territorial. And if the intersection of Territorial and Elm does become a problem, a safety problem because there are visual impediments, and a safety problem because we get drag races on Territorial, on the west side of Territorial. It's a tough place. But I would ask that as subsequent subdivision sections are approved, that the Planning Commission ask for before and after traffic counts and speed management, so that it can be determined whether the subdivision folks who want to go to 99E do like half the people down on Knight's Bridge do, which is to use Birch and Territorial as the bypass. I know you can't make any judgments about whether an increase of traffic on Territorial is a result of people using the back bypass to 99E and Northeast Portland, Northeast Canby. But I do think that you could monitor the impact of this subdivision by monitoring traffic counts and speeds on North Elm. So that's just a sort of, as you think about the next phases and whether or not Elm and Territorial require calming and/or traffic signals and/or any other mitigation, which right now I think are not contemplated because all the discussion is about traffic on Birch. So that's what I came here to say, but I would like to offer comment about HOAs. I didn't used to think I was a supporter of homeowners associations. I have lived in 3 states and been in communities with homeowners associations in 3 states, in Corvallis, in Charbonneau with 2-tiered HOAs, and I now live in an adjacent subdivision here that has CCRs but no HOA. So when we've had 1 or 2 violators of the CCRs, what happens is that it sort of pits neighbor on neighbor. It's one neighbor who's unhappy and afflicted by the disobedience of another neighbor, maybe their next door neighbor, and there's kind of nobody except some other neighbor may agree. So you walk the street and you say, well, is it bothering you that they've got a broken down car in the front driveway which violates, or some other violation of CCNR? So in the best sense of HOA, one thing that an HOA does, and I would recommend for this subdivision, is an HOA provides some sort of structure and accountability for which neighbors who believe they have a case to make about violation of CCNRs don't have to go testify before City Council, and it's too late to come to the Planning Commission. So I think there is an argument in favor of HOAs after the developers leave the scene, as it were, so that there is some sort of governance structure to hold residents accountable for keeping it a fine, clean, friendly community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the gentlelady? No. Okay. Any other opponents? Come on up. Sit. Please state your name and address for the record.
I'm Logan Sessions, and I live at 646 Northwest 12th Avenue.
Congratulations on being here, Logan. It's good that you're here and glad to have you.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that I personally would absolutely do not want to lose our dead-end street, because it's very nice having one, very peaceful, able to do walks on it, fly my RC helicopter without getting interrupted by cars. It's very nice. So I would like, but since it will happen, I don't know, I would like if you would delay it as late as possible until it's absolutely needed, including doing utilities and roads.
Thank you. And what's that, looks like the most recent dangling badge on your right breast there?
It's from a leadership training program.
Congratulations. Thanks for coming. Well done. Any other opponents? Okay, is there anyone that's neutral? Anyone that just wants to make other comments that didn't want to classify themselves as opponent or proponent? Okay, not hearing any. Oh. Okay, we have a neutral.
I'm neutral.
Non-proponent, non-opponent.
My name is Allison Etzel. I'm at 400 Northwest 9th. I live right next to St. Patrick's on the corner of 9th and Grant. I think I don't know if I should call it a concern or, you know, if I'm too late for that section. As I read through the packet today, there was some discussion about, basically the power lines on 10th and them not being able to be run underground, and maybe I'm misreading that or misinformed, but from what I understood, the Canby Utility was not going to put the power lines that are on 10th Avenue underground because of some cost prohibitive construction. I wanted to know if that was the case, if anybody knows.
They are proposed to be overhead.
Are they feeders?
Yeah, they're main feeders, and it's the cost is just absolutely exorbitant to
Yeah,
try to
that's-
underground main feeders.
Pretty much what I wanted to know is why, and I think they should really reconsider that, because it really is going to detract from the feel and the aesthetics of the entire development if there's just this, they're not unsightly, but it just adds to the aesthetics of the rest of the development being underground power lines versus this one section being not underground.
Okay.
That was it.
Is there any questions? Thank you. Anyone else that wanted to speak on the neutral time?
Actually, I have one question, actually. You read this whole packet today?
No, I skimmed through it over the last couple of days.
I was going to say,
You're gonna
because
sign
we've
her
got an
up for
extra
a
seat over
CR?
I tried my best to read through and study the maps and read through several of the planning commission's recommendations and whatnot. But, I didn't have a chance to do the whole due diligence because we were running out of time.
Very good.
All right. Well, then, let us go to the applicant and his rebuttal period.
Again, I'm Kurt McLeod, and just have a few comments. From Susan Sessions' discussion, we have talked about this before, and it's a concern for us also on monitoring CC&R requirements and who enforces CC&R requirements. Right now, the way the CC&Rs are written, we have a clause in the CC&R that really any homeowner can call an attorney, and the attorney is the one that can enforce the CC&R and recover the cost of the attorney's fees. That's actually a clause in the CC&R. So we're working to avoid that neighbor against neighbor. The way it is now, and I don't see that an HOA would really change that. An HOA is made up of the people that live in the neighborhood also. It's just that they're a separate taxed agency, so you have to file a tax return and have dues and a lot of administration. So we will be looking at the CC&Rs for Phase 2 to see what we can do to simplify that. We don't believe that we've allowed anyone to violate the CC&Rs. The CC&Rs that we impose are above and beyond the Canby code requirements. They're elective things that we have mandated that you have to do these things. In the absence of CC&Rs, they simply wouldn't have any restriction. They can do whatever the code would allow them to do. We have put in restrictions that say, for example, you can't park a broken car on the street, you can't park it in your driveway if it's not drivable, you can't park trailers, etc. Now, one of the things that she mentioned on lot number 8, we are also striving to do the back driveways like this, so that we have the front of the houses facing Elm Street, and lot 8 is the lot that's on the other side of 13th Street. And so it was actually a lot that abutted a 36-foot roadway, and because of the difficulty in doing the back driveway, we elected to change that. Now, the process of changing the CC&Rs, it takes 50% of the members, and everyone that owns a home in there is a member of the CC&R, a member of the ruling body of the CC&R. So I had to go door to door and get everyone's approval to actually change the condition of the CC&R for lot number 8. And the only reason we allowed that to change was because it had a full 36-foot street in front of it. The rest of them do not. The rest of them have a 20-foot one-way street. So we're going to be having to hold firm on that and push to achieve that goal that we're after of having all those houses front without driveways.
Question for you.
Yes.
Do your CC&Rs typically, CC&Rs would only allow an owner to enforce them? Do your CC&Rs have something else in them that would allow your company to enforce the CC&R after you've sold all the lots and developed the whole thing?
Actually, anyone can enforce a CC&R. A neighbor down the street can enforce a CC&R. So the CC&R is a legal requirement on the people that live within that subdivision, and there's a clause for recovery of attorney's fees, so they can even be isolated from whoever they're making the case against. We want it to be something that everyone agrees to those rules when they buy a lot, so they know what the rules are. So if they violate the rules, we don't want to get a neighbor against a neighbor. We want a provision so that those rules can be enforced to maintain the quality that we want in the subdivision.
And you
So-
do record your CC&Rs?
Yes. In fact, we submit the CC&Rs to the city. The city reviews those. Phase 1, that was a requirement that we submit them for city review before we approve them and record them. So they're a legal document that binds anyone that lives in that subdivision to those requirements, and anyone can enforce them. So even as a developer, once we sell all the lots, we would have the ability to still enforce the CCNR, just like anyone that lives there or anyone that lives down the street. A comment on the traffic, on the speed, on Birch and Territorial. We're anxious to do something also that could help that. What we had proposed, in fact, 5 years ago, we proposed to do more traffic calming improvements on Birch Street, but the city asked us not to do that at that time. So I don't know the story behind that. As a city, working with the city, we built the intersection at Territorial and Birch with those islands, as you can picture, which I think have a dramatic impact. We would propose to do similar improvements on Territorial and Birch would be fine. I think as a developer, we can do those much cheaper than the city can do those because we're not required to follow public bid laws or prevailing wage rates, but we would simply ask that those off-site improvements would allow us an SDC credit to pay for those. So again, we don't have any grief doing that. I think it'd be very efficient for us to work up designs for the city Public Works Department to review and approve, and we can implement those improvements on Birch and Territorial if they desire. The traffic studies, when she mentioned having before and after counts, we've had three traffic studies on this property already, and of course each time they do a traffic study they project full build out and they generate the amount of traffic it's going to create. So they've concluded that this development doesn't impact beyond acceptable limits. Of course it impacts, of course the traffic's going to increase, but it doesn't increase above acceptable limits. So it's simply a painful fact of life as the neighborhood develops. There certainly is more traffic. So with that, thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Savory.
So, did I hear you correctly that you would be willing to do some traffic calming enhancements to both Birch and Territorial? Is that what, did I hear that?
Yes, yes, in exchange for SDC credits, but we can do it very efficiently, and I'm anxious to work with the city to do whatever they think we can do to improve the speed on both of those streets. I live on Birch Street also, just off of Birch Street.
I drive up and down Birch Street, and so yes, I know how crazy it gets sometimes.
Yeah.
So, in your estimation, what would be the most effective form of traffic calming on both Birch and Territorial?
Well, you realize we had a traffic study done not too long ago to identify calming devices for Birch Street, and I don't think they addressed Territorial, but for Birch Street, I was a little surprised that they did not recommend bump outs or islands. They recommended signage, I believe, was the main thing they wanted. I think a feedback that said what your speed was so that you could recognize you're going too fast. Those do not seem very effective to me. I would see a bump out similar to Birch Street at 12th and 10th, I think, or even 13th and 10th, or, yeah, let me back up. 10th and 12th or 10th and 13th. So we'd really have three islands, and I think that would really do the job of keeping people driving slower. We have to address how bikes get through. That's one of our challenges with the Public Works Department, but I think we have new designs that would allow a bike to get through a necked down bump out area. But in my mind, a bump down area does a much better job without putting a speed bump or a speed hump in the street. Allows smooth traffic to go through, but still, as you come to that, like we did on 2nd Avenue, when we first put 2nd Avenue bump outs in, a lot of complaints because people are saying, you know, you can't get through there, you have to drive slow. But that's the point. And so there was a lot of complaints about that. So that's what I would think would be useful.
What, you mentioned speed bumps or humps, which seems to me a fair, I mean, as a person that, you know, I drive fast and I got the speeding tickets to prove it. And so I find personally that the speed humps are, you know, are good. I agree with you, you know, putting something up that tells people that you know, oh, you're going too fast. Well, thank you so much for the information, but, you know, the speed humps actually force you to slow down. I mean, just 1 minute. So why would that not be?
The problem with humps is that the emergency services people have a real problem with that, to drive ambulances and fire trucks and police cars through streets with humps or bumps. That's where the resistance comes from. So we strive to do something other than humps and bumps, just for that reason.
Okay.
That's been a long-standing issue with the city and the Traffic Safety Committee and the community. Everyone would like to have a speed bump on their roadway, but it's simply detrimental to getting emergency service vehicles in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the public input portion of the hearing is now closed, and we will move to deliberation and commission questions for staff. Any discussion, questions for staff amongst ourselves? We'll combine the two. No?
I have one. I was looking on this Elm section around the park area. Is there any bike path through this whole development? I'm not finding any. Okay.
The TSP
Doesn't require it there.
it says that there should be a shared one on 10th, but it doesn't require striping.
Okay.
Young one.
The other comment I have is the parking around this, for these houses that are around this park piece. I think really if you stifle off that property and don't allow them some kind of parking, I think that they're going to have a big issue with those lots. If you've got a two-car driveway that you don't have any other access to parking except for, half a block down the road, you need some kind of access for other parking around that, I believe, but.
Are you asking staff a question?
No,
or
I'm just putting my 2 cents
deliberating?
worth in there.
Okay.
Can I add my 2 cents?
Yeah, let's try,
I'm in the.
All right, so I want to just make sure we've got questions for staff out of the way before we really start just debating the merits of the thing. So is there any specific questions for staff at this time, or we could go more into deliberation and maybe ask staff a question if we need to? Okay, go, Mr. Savory.
Okay, so again, I can't make out that lot number there. It looks like a 46, is that right?
65, I think.
65, and that one there, and this character right there. What would be the objection to carving out little setting a niche so you could have angled parking of 3 or 4 spots right in that park area right there that is not going to have any, it's going to look nice, but serve, not much in the way of a useful purpose in terms of actually being a place where people will go and enjoy a park-like setting. So my thinking would be that you could put some angled parking there and some angled parking there that would allow the service utility vehicles you were talking about to have access to that, but also will allow these lots, I hate to say landlocked, but that's what they appear to be. You could, these people could have some parking, some off-street parking. I mean, that would seem to make sense to me if we could, if that's allowable. Is it?
Well, that could be your input on how this proposed parkland is to be used. I know that staff is basically against that idea because the parkland was negotiated with the master plan for a certain acreage, and the desire is for usable parkland, not to serve as a parking lot for the private developer. And so you're utilizing our dedicated open space for parking. And so that would be the general concern about that, is that you're lessening what the public had negotiated to get as a public benefit for private use. It's possible that that could be done, but that's the downfall of it, is it was intended for public use, not for private use.
Well, I think it's been stated that we were talking about putting one here for the parks people to be able to put their maintenance vehicles in. And it seems to me a little ridiculous to have those there, not usable, when they'll be used perhaps once a week, once every other week, or less in the wintertime, if they're not available to the local residents to use.
I think that
I
could be a
agree.
good compromise. That was a last-minute proposal by the maintenance park staff to have those. Certain staff members didn't agree with that, but since if they're going to be there, making those dual use could very well be a good compromise position.
Yeah, I don't think if we're gonna, I'm in favor of having no parking on the one-way street except for some carve-outs that, could be used for utility or public works workers or public parking. Maybe we consider imposing something like a time limit on the signs there, or something like you have in some certain parking spots.
Because we're 20 feet on that road, right?
Was 28 without any parking, I think, wasn't it?
Is it 28 or?
The street pavement is 20 feet wide on the
Only
one-way
20 feet
section.
wide, okay.
28 feet everywhere else,
Oh, okay.
well, except for 10.
Those would be my thoughts on that particular issue. We do have one condition that could be modified to make that happen, and that would be condition 22 that was recommended by staff could be modified, if that was the way we went, to address that. Or proposed, I guess staff proposed condition 22.
So Tyler, are you suggesting that they do some carve-out?
I would be in favor of that, instead of, having a carve-out, whether maybe one on each side, something like that, instead of a public works parking area.
I think it's a great idea.
So in other discussion, generally, one of the ways that I tend to look at things, unless there's, competing interests from the audience stating otherwise, is that our staff does an excellent job of thoroughly reviewing things and making recommendations to us. And so generally, I look to the staff's conditions myself and see if maybe staff just got it wrong on some occasion, or, as I think here, they just basically got it all pretty much spot on for the most part, and then talk to the applicants and the opponents and whatnot about, are there conditions or code criteria that just can't be met, or conditions that should be, changed or whatnot. And I didn't hear much from the applicants, and actually I heard acquiescence that basically the conditions are pretty much fine with them. And so I don't really see that there's much impetus to scrutinize staff's recommended conditions too closely when the applicant doesn't even have a problem with them. I didn't hear any of the opponents having much of a problem with them either, except for the homeowners association requirement. But I'm not entirely sure that we could force, if we tried to force a homeowners association on somebody, I'm not entirely sure that we'd have that power. As she mentioned, there is such a thing as a statute that's on planned unit developments, and when there's a planned unit development, I believe by the time you sell your last lot, you're supposed to have a homeowners association in place when you have a planned unit development. But I don't think that would qualify here because there's no affirmative development going on and no planning of the development. It's just a subdivision, which may be, I think she took note of the fact that may be semantics, but I think, the law has a lot of semantics in it. So I don't know that we could do anything about that particular provision, but if they record their CC&Rs, to me, that, covers a lot of that, and if they're the way the gentleman says, in terms of some extra provisions in there for enforceability. With respect to my general sentiment, might differ from what staff recommended a little bit, is that on infill, that the 52 lot be not deemed infill, and that the 54 lot be deemed infill. I didn't hear any real justification for how we would not deem 54 as infill. With 52 having multiple story houses already on the sides to it, it would seem to me to be not be infill, but that was something that came up to me. On the sidewalks, I've seen and dealt with the citywide problem of having inconsistent sidewalks before, but generally that problem in Hubbard, when I was a city councilor in Hubbard, we had city sidewalks that were different widths, and sometimes then they didn't align because of the different widths. And when you'd have ADA ramps and whatnot, and to get up onto them, that was a problem. As long as they're consistent, I don't have any problem. They sort of align with each other at the edges of the development with the other sidewalks. Basically maybe they're consistent block to block. I don't really have any concern about the width on those, was my comments on that. With the lumens and the lighting issue, I was certainly involved. I think I was only the illustrious vice chairman at the time during the lumens discussion, but I do know that in my mind we were discussing that in terms of residential property. We weren't thinking about city lights, at least I wasn't in my mind. And in my mind, that was not intended to have applied for city street lighting. That wasn't what was in my mind. So I would have no problem us interpreting for future purposes that those lumen requirements were not intended for official street lighting. Let me think. The cul-de-sac, if the fire department